Some dreams are born from words written in secret journals. Some careers are destroyed in a single moment of cruel arrogance. For 16-year-old Zoe Rivera, her lifelong ambition of becoming a novelist was nothing more than childish fantasy, at least according to Mr. Lawrence Harrington, the most feared literature teacher at Westlake High School. What began as a routine classroom presentation quickly spiraled into public humiliation as Mr. Harrington tore apart not just Zoe's writing, but her deepest dreams. He never expected anyone to challenge his authority. He never thought twice about reading Zoe's private journal entries aloud to the class, mocking her most personal stories with clinical detachment. After all, he was the expert, the gatekeeper who determined which students had talent and which should surrender their literary aspirations. But Mr. Harrington made one critical mistake. He didn't notice the man standing silently in the doorway, a man who had arrived early for parent-teacher conferences, a man who had heard everything, a man named Diego Rivera who was about to change the course of everyone's lives in ways no one could have predicted. Some say karma is patient. Others say it waits for the perfect moment to reveal uncomfortable truths. For Mr. Harrington, that moment had arrived, and the consequences would echo through years to come, transforming teacher and student in ways neither could imagine. The bell rang through the hallways of Westlake High School, signaling the beginning of fifth-period advanced English literature. Students shuffled into the classroom, their voices a mixture of excitement and dread. Today was Career Aspiration Day, a yearly tradition where seniors presented their future dreams to the class. Zoe Rivera clutched her leather-bound journal tightly against her chest as she slipped into her seat in the back row. At 16, she was younger than most of her classmates, having skipped a grade due to her exceptional writing skills. Her long dark hair fell forward, creating a protective curtain around her face as she flipped through the pages of her journal. Inside were the carefully crafted short stories and novel outlines she'd been developing since she was 12. "Settle down, everyone," Mr. Lawrence Harrington called out, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of teaching literature to teenagers who he believed cared more about their social media presence than Hemingway or Austen. At 45, Mr. Harrington had once harbored his own literary ambitions. The manuscript of his novel had collected dust in his desk drawer for the past decade, a reminder of dreams deferred. The classroom quieted as Mr. Harrington adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. He was known throughout Westlake High as a brilliant but harsh critic, someone who believed that crushing dreams early was better than allowing students to face rejection later in life. "Today, as you all know, is Career Aspiration Day," he announced, leaning against his desk at the front of the classroom. "You'll each have 3 minutes to present your career goals and what steps you plan to take to achieve them." His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on Zoe before moving on. "Remember, I'm grading you not just on presentation skills, but on how realistic your goals are." Several students groaned. Mr. Harrington's definition of realistic was notorious. Last year, he'd given a failing grade to a student who wanted to become a screenwriter, telling her that she had better chances of winning the lottery. "We'll go alphabetically by last name," Mr. Harrington announced, checking his roster. "That means Abigail Anderson, you're up first." One by one, students made their way to the front of the classroom. Most chose safe options: accounting, engineering, marketing. When Thomas Patel mentioned his dream of becoming a journalist, Mr. Harrington nodded approvingly. "A challenging field, but with your analytical mind, you might make it," he commented. As the list of names continued, Zoe's anxiety grew. She opened her journal and reread her presentation notes, making small adjustments and crossing out phrases that suddenly seemed too ambitious or naive. Her dream of becoming a best-selling novelist had been with her since she'd written her first short story in 3rd grade. Her father, Diego Rivera, had encouraged her every step of the way, telling her stories of great authors who faced rejection after rejection before finding success. "Zoe Rivera," Mr. Harrington called finally. Taking a deep breath, Zoe gathered her journal and a folder containing printed copies of her best work. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked to the front of the class. Several students offered encouraging smiles. Despite being quiet, Zoe was well-liked, known for her kindness and willingness to help others with their English assignments. "My career aspiration," she began, her voice soft but steady, "is to become a published novelist." She placed her folder on Mr. Harrington's desk. "I've included some samples of my work. I've been developing a fantasy series that explores themes of identity and belonging through the story of a girl who discovers she can step into the worlds of books she reads." A few students murmured with interest. Zoe continued, gaining confidence as she spoke about her love for storytelling and her plan to major in creative writing in college. I've researched the publishing industry extensively, she explained. I understand it's competitive, but I'm prepared for that journey. I've already started submitting short stories to literary magazines, and I'm working on refining my first full-length manuscript. As she spoke, Mr. Harrington flipped through the pages of her writing samples, his expression growing increasingly skeptical. When Zoe finished her presentation, the class applauded politely. She waited for Mr. Harrington's feedback, hoping for constructive criticism that might help her improve. Instead, Mr. Harrington let out a short, dismissive laugh that silenced the room. "Ms. Rivera," he said, closing her folder with a decisive snap. "Every year, I have at least one student who wants to be a novelist. Do you know how many actually succeed?" Without waiting for an answer, he continued, "Virtually none. The publishing industry is not just competitive, it's nearly impossible to break into." Zoe stood frozen beside his desk, her face growing hot with embarrassment. "Your writing," Mr. Harrington continued, holding up one of her pages, "is derivative at best. This character," he squinted at the page, "Lyra, reads like a carbon copy of every young adult protagonist published in the last decade." The classroom had gone completely still. Even the students who usually texted under their desks were watching the scene unfold with uncomfortable expressions. "But sir," Zoe said quietly, "I was hoping for specific feedback on how to improve my—" "Improve?" Mr. Harrington interrupted, raising his eyebrows. "I'm trying to save you years of rejection and disappointment. The writing world doesn't need another teenage fantasy about magical powers and self-discovery." He stood up and addressed the class. "This is exactly the kind of unrealistic aspiration I was talking about. Writing should be a hobby, not a career plan. Ms. Rivera would be better served focusing on something more practical." From the back of the room, Priya Desai, Zoe's best friend, raised her hand. "Mr. Harrington, I've read Zoe's stories. They're really good." Mr. Harrington's gaze hardened. "Friendship is not the same as literary criticism, Ms. Desai. In fact, let me demonstrate." He picked up one of Zoe's pages and began to read aloud. Lyra felt the world shift beneath her feet as the words on the page began to glow. The barrier between reality and fiction thinned, becoming as delicate as the pages of her beloved books. With one step, she could cross over, leave behind the loneliness of being misunderstood and enter a world where her differences were gifts, not burdens. He looked up at the class. Cliched. Melodramatic. The kind of writing that fills the slush piles of every publishing house in New York. Tears stung Zoe's eyes as she stared at the floor. Each word felt like a physical blow, dismantling not just her presentation but the dream she'd nurtured for years. "I spent 2 summers at writers' workshops," she said, her voice barely audible. "My instructors said I had potential. Summer programs will take anyone who can pay the fee," Mr. Harrington replied dismissively. "They're not in the business of honesty." Zoe collected her writing samples with shaking hands. As she reached for her journal, Mr. Harrington picked it up, flipping through it casually. "Sir, that's private," Zoe protested, reaching for it. "If you want to be a published author, nothing is private," he responded. "You'd better get used to criticism. In fact, the entire class should learn from this." He turned to a page and began to read another excerpt, this one from a story Zoe had written about her mother's death when she was 8, a deeply personal piece she hadn't intended to share. "Mama's hands were always warm, even when the hospital room was cold. She told me stories until the end, her voice growing fainter but never losing the magic that made princesses and dragons seem real. The day she died, I promised her I would write our stories down, that I would become the storyteller she believed I could be." The class had gone completely silent. Several students looked away, embarrassed to be witnessing such a personal moment exposed without permission. "Sentimentality is the enemy of good writing," Mr. Harrington declared, closing the journal. "This reads like a Hallmark card, not literature." Zoe snatched her journal back, tears now streaming down her face. "You had no right," she whispered. "I have every right as your teacher to evaluate your work honestly," Mr. Harrington replied. "The world won't coddle you, Ms. Rivera. Publishers will be far less kind than I'm being." "But you're not being kind at all," said a quiet voice from the doorway. The entire class turned to see a man standing there, arms crossed over his chest. He was in his early 40s, with the same dark eyes as Zoe and a stern expression focused entirely on Mr. Harrington. The blood drained from Zoe's face. "Dad," she whispered, "you're early." Mr. Harrington frowned. "Parent-teacher conferences don't begin until 4 o'clock, Mr. Rivera." "Diego Rivera?" the man said, stepping into the classroom. "And you must be Mr. Harrington. I've heard so much about you." His tone made it clear that what he'd heard hadn't been positive. "Please, don't let me interrupt. You were in the middle of teaching my daughter about writing." The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, but no one moved. The air in the classroom was thick with tension as Zoe's father walked toward the front of the room, his gaze never leaving Mr. Harrington's increasingly uncomfortable expression. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. The tension in classroom 203 stretched like an over-tightened guitar string as Diego Rivera stepped fully into the room. At 42, he carried himself with quiet confidence, dressed not in the business suit Mr. Harrington might have expected from a parent, but in a casual blazer over a graphic t-shirt featuring the cover of James Baldwin's Go Tell It on a Mountain. "As I said, conferences aren't until 4, Mr. Harrington repeated, attempting to regain control of the situation. He straightened his tie and gestured toward the door. "Perhaps you could wait in the main office until then." Diego ignored the suggestion and instead turned to his daughter. "Are you okay, Zoe?" She nodded quickly, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "I'm fine, Dad." "You don't look fine," Diego observed, his voice gentle, but his eyes sharp as they returned to Mr. Harrington. "I caught the tail end of your critique. Quite thorough." The students remained frozen in their seats, sensing the drama unfolding was far from over. No one dared to leave, despite the bell having rung. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "Mr. Rivera, I understand parental concern, but I assure you I was merely giving your daughter the kind of honest feedback she'll need to face the real world." Diego nodded thoughtfully. "Honest feedback. I see." He picked up one of Zoe's writing samples from the desk. "Do you mind if I take a look?" Since we're all about honest feedback here. Without waiting for permission, he began reading the page, his expression neutral. After a moment, he flipped to another page, then another. The room was so quiet that the sound of paper turning seemed unnaturally loud. "Interesting approach to literary criticism," Diego finally said, placing the pages back on the desk. "I'm curious, what publishing houses have you worked with, Mr. Harrington?" The teacher blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I haven't worked directly in publishing, but I have extensive academic experience with literature and so your expertise on what constitutes publishable material comes from." Diego left the question hanging. Mr. Harrington's jaw tightened. 20 years of teaching literature, a master's degree from NYU, and my own writing experience. There was a defensive edge to his voice now. "I was quite close to being published myself once." "Were you?" Diego's interest seemed to pique. "Tell me about that." The students exchanged glances, confused by the turn in conversation but riveted nonetheless. Zoe stood rigid beside her father, her eyes darting between him and her teacher. "It's hardly relevant to this discussion," Mr. Harrington said, increasingly uncomfortable. "I disagree," Diego replied calmly. "You just publicly evaluated my daughter's chances of success as a writer. I'd like to understand the basis for that evaluation." Mr. Harrington's face flushed slightly. "Fine. 10 years ago, I completed a novel, a literary fiction piece exploring academic disillusionment. I submitted it to several publishing houses and received some interest." "Which houses?" Diego asked innocently. "Riverstone Press, among others," Mr. Harrington answered with a touch of pride, referring to one of the more prestigious literary publishing houses in New York. "I received personalized feedback from an editor there, not just a form rejection." Diego's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "What was the title of your manuscript?" The classroom atmosphere shifted as students sensed something significant was unfolding. Mr. Harrington hesitated before answering, "The Hollow Laurels." Diego Rivera's face broke into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What a remarkable coincidence." "I'm sorry." Mr. Harrington frowned. "The Hollow Laurels by Lawrence Harrington," Diego said, nodding slowly. "I remember it well." Mr. Harrington's face drained of color. "You remember it?" "Of course. Riverstone Press, 2014. I was the acquiring editor who reviewed your manuscript." A collective gasp went through the classroom. Zoe's eyes widened as she stared at her father. "That's impossible," Mr. Harrington whispered, the blood now rushing back to his face in a deep flush. Diego Rivera, former senior acquisitions editor at Riverstone Press, Diego said, extending his hand, currently executive publisher at Meridian Books. Your manuscript crossed my desk personally. The students began murmuring excitedly. Priya Desai actually clapped her hands over her mouth to stifle a sound. Mr. Harrington stood paralyzed, his hand halfway extended before he pulled it back. I received a rejection, he finally managed to say. After initial interest. Yes, you did, Diego confirmed. Would you like to know why? The teacher swallowed hard but said nothing. Your manuscript showed promise, Diego continued, his tone professional now, as if they were in a publishing office rather than a high school classroom. The prose was elegant, if somewhat derivative of Philip Roth. The characterization needed work, but the core concept was intriguing. We sent you an editorial letter suggesting revisions, which is not something we did lightly. Mr. Harrington's expression had become a mixture of disbelief and growing horror. Do you remember what happened next? Diego asked. When Mr. Harrington remained silent, Diego turned to the class. Mr. Harrington sent back a 15-page response explaining why our editorial suggestions were wrong, how we had failed to grasp his artistic vision, and questioning our literary credentials. He turned back to the teacher. You suggested that perhaps our commercial sensibilities had dulled our appreciation for true literary merit. A few students snickered before quickly silencing themselves. Mr. Harrington's face had gone from red to ashen. That wasn't. I was. He stammered. You were arrogant, Diego stated flatly. And that, Mr. Harrington, is why your novel was rejected. Not because of your writing, but because of your attitude. No editor will work with an author who refuses to accept feedback, no matter how talented they might be. Mr. Harrington sank slowly into his chair, looking as if he'd been physically struck. Diego picked up Zoe's journal and handed it back to her. My daughter has been writing since she was 8 years old. She's received criticism before, constructive criticism from professional writers at workshops who understand the difference between tearing someone down and helping them grow. Zoe clutched her journal to her chest, looking at her father with new understanding. She knew he worked in publishing, but had never connected that her teacher's manuscript might have crossed his desk. But what's truly interesting, Diego continued, his voice taking on an edge that made everyone in the room sit straighter, is your comment about my daughter's work being derivative? Because as I was reading these pages, I noticed something odd. He pulled a tablet from his messenger bag and after a few taps, held it up. This is a digital manuscript that was submitted to our new author contest at Meridian Books 3 months ago. The submission was titled Echoes in the Academy by a Lawrence H. Whitfield. Mr. Harrington's face went completely white. There's a passage in Chapter 3, Diego continued, scrolling through the document. Here it is. Professor Caldwell felt the ground shift beneath his feet as reality and memory began to blur. The barrier between past and present thinned, becoming as delicate as the pages of his research journals. With one mental step backward, he could cross over, leave behind the disappointment of academic politics, and return to a time where his scholarly ambitions were still untarnished by compromise. The similarity to the passage Mr. Harrington had mockingly read from Zoe's work was unmistakable. Several students gasped audibly. That's coincidental, Mr. Harrington stammered. Similar imagery, perhaps, but is it? Diego asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Because there are at least 6 other passages in your manuscript that bear remarkable similarities to student work I found in Zoe's journal, work dating back over a year. Work you've had access to as her teacher. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. No one spoke. You've been plagiarizing from your students, Diego stated flatly. That's absurd, Mr. Harrington finally managed, rising from his chair. You can't prove. Actually, I can, Diego interrupted. After I noticed the similarities, I ran both your manuscript and samples of student work Zoe had at home through plagiarism detection software. The results were illuminating. He tapped his tablet again and turned it to show a report with highlighted passages and percentage matches. That's not admissible evidence, Mr. Harrington protested, his voice rising. You invaded my privacy. That manuscript was submitted under a pseudonym for blind review, which is why I didn't immediately recognize it as yours, Diego explained. Until today, when I heard you reading my daughter's work aloud, work that had clearly inspired passages in your manuscript. This is slander, Mr. Harrington hissed, but his eyes darted nervously around the room. It's not slander if it's true, Diego replied calmly. And there are 20 witnesses in this room who just heard you read aloud the original version of a passage you later adapted for your own work. I want all of you to leave. Mr. Harrington suddenly ordered the students, his voice shaking. Class is dismissed. No one moved. You stole from us? Thomas Patel asked from his seat, his expression horrified. From our writing assignments? Of course not, Mr. Harrington snapped. This is all a misunderstanding, is it? Another voice came from the doorway. Principal Donna Walsh stood there with her arms crossed, a stern expression on her face. Mr. Harrington, my office. Now, Donna, this is a ridiculous accusation, Mr. Harrington began, switching to a more placating tone. Mr. Rivera clearly has some personal vendetta. Save it, Lawrence, Principal Walsh interrupted. Mr. Rivera contacted me last week with his concerns and evidence. I've been reviewing student assignments from your classes going back 3 years, comparing them with your recent manuscript submissions to various publishers and contests. Mr. Harrington's face crumpled as he realized the depth of his exposure. Students, please proceed to your next class, Principal Walsh instructed. Ms. Rivera, you and your father may join us in my office if you wish. As the students reluctantly gathered their belongings and filed out, many casting shocked glances back at their teacher, Zoe remained rooted to the spot, staring at Mr. Harrington. All those times you told me my writing wasn't good enough, she said quietly. All those C-minuses and lacks originality comments. You were stealing my ideas while telling me they weren't worth anything. Mr. Harrington couldn't meet her eyes. The saddest part, Diego added, placing a supportive hand on his daughter's shoulder, is that you could have been a mentor. You could have nurtured these young voices instead of silencing them to amplify your own. Principal Walsh gestured toward the door. Lawrence, we need to discuss your employment status. As Mr. Harrington woodenly collected his things and followed the principal out, Diego turned to his daughter. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Zoe. I was investigating my suspicions, but I didn't want to say anything until I was certain. Zoe looked up at her father with tears in her eyes, but these weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of vindication. All this time, I thought maybe he was right, that maybe my writing really wasn't good enough. Diego shook his head firmly. Your writing has always been good enough. More than good enough. That's why he stole from it. As they walked out of the now empty classroom, Priya was waiting in the hallway. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen, she told Zoe. Your dad is like literary Batman. Despite everything, Zoe laughed. He kind of is, isn't he? Diego smiled modestly. Just a concerned father who happens to work in publishing. He checked his watch. I need to call the office about this. I'll meet you at home later, okay? Unless you want to go home now. Zoe considered for a moment, then straightened her shoulders. No, I'm staying. I still have classes to attend. Diego nodded with approval. That's my girl. Never let anyone drive you away from where you belong. As he walked away down the hall, Priya linked her arm through Zoe's. Your dad just ended Mr. Harrington's whole career. I can't believe it. Neither can I, Zoe admitted, clutching her journal close. But you know what this means, right? What? It means my writing is actually good, Zoe said, a smile breaking through her tears. Good enough to steal. 3 years later, the spring air in New York City carried the scent of possibility as pedestrians hurried past the gleaming windows of Strand Bookstore. Inside, Lawrence Harrington shelved a stack of newly arrived fiction, his employee badge catching the afternoon light. At 48, he looked older than his years, the past 3 years having etched deeper lines around his eyes and mouth. Lawrence, can you handle the register for a bit? His manager called. Tara needs to take her break. Of course, he replied, making his way to the front of the store. Life had changed dramatically since that fateful day at Westlake High when his career as an educator had imploded spectacularly. The plagiarism scandal had made local news, ensuring no school in the district would hire him again. After months of unemployment, the Strand had offered him a position, a literary lifeline he hadn't deserved but desperately needed. The bell above the door chimed as customers entered, but Lawrence barely looked up until he heard excited whispers ripple through the store. Is that her? The author's signing is today? I brought my copy to get signed. Lawrence froze as he saw the poster displayed near the entrance. Book signing today. Zoe Rivera, best-selling author of Borrowed Voices, a New York Times notable book of the year. His hands trembled slightly as he watched the store manager escort a young woman to the signing table. At 19, Zoe Rivera had blossomed into a confident writer. Her debut novel, released while she was still a freshman at Columbia University, had taken the literary world by storm, the story of a high school student whose writing teacher steals her work while crushing her dreams. A line quickly formed as readers clutched copies of her book. Lawrence remained at the register, unable to look away, but hoping she wouldn't notice him. She based it on her own experience. A customer told her friend while waiting in line. Can you imagine? Her teacher stole her writing while telling her she had no talent. Poetic justice that she's famous now and he's wherever he ended up, the friend replied. Lawrence swallowed hard, processing the reality of his fall and her rise. As the signing continued, he considered slipping away to the stockroom, but something kept him rooted in place, perhaps the need to witness the full circle of consequences. Halfway through the event, Zoe looked up and their eyes met across the store. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something unexpected, not satisfaction or triumph, but calm acknowledgement. She didn't look away, holding his gaze steadily before returning her attention to her readers. When the signing ended, Lawrence busied himself with inventory, hoping to avoid a confrontation. But as the crowd thinned, he heard footsteps approaching the counter. Hello, Mr. Harrington. He looked up to find Zoe standing before him, a copy of her book in hand. She'd grown taller, more self-assured, her posture no longer that of a student shrinking under criticism. Zoe, he managed, his voice rough. Congratulations on your success. Thank you. She placed the book on the counter. I'd like to buy this copy, please. Confused, Lawrence rang up the purchase. You want to buy your own book. It's not for me. She paid and then took a pen from her purse, opening to the dedication page where the words, for those whose voices were borrowed without permission, may you speak louder than ever, were printed. Below that, she wrote something and closed the book, sliding it back across the counter to him. I thought you might want a copy, she said simply. Lawrence stared at the book, then slowly opened it to read her handwritten note. Mr. Harrington, our stories shape us, even the painful chapters. Thank you for being part of mine. Zoe Rivera. He looked up stunned. I don't understand. After what I did, I'm not here to forgive you, Zoe clarified. That's not mine to give. But I wanted you to know that what happened helped me find my voice. And I hope maybe you found yours too, your real one, not one borrowed from students who trusted you. Lawrence's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. I haven't written since, he admitted. Not a word. Zoe nodded. Maybe someday you will again. Your own stories this time. She gestured around the bookstore. You're surrounded by authentic voices here. That seems fitting. From across the store, Diego Rivera approached, now executive publisher at Meridian Books, and the force behind his daughter's meteoric rise. He'd insisted on editorial independence for Zoe's work, but had provided the connections she needed to be read by those who mattered. Ready to go, Zoe? The Columbia Writing Workshop starts in an hour. Coming, Dad. She turned back to Lawrence. I'm mentoring young writers now, showing them how to protect their work while developing their craft. A small, knowing smile crossed her face. I teach them that criticism without kindness isn't education. It's just cruelty. Lawrence nodded, unable to speak as years of regret constricted his throat. Diego noticed him then, his expression hardening momentarily before settling into professional neutrality. Mr. Harrington, Mr. Rivera. Lawrence managed a nod. Life has a way of arranging appropriate consequences, Diego observed. Are you finding your work here fulfilling? There was no mockery in the question, only genuine curiosity. More than I expected, Lawrence answered honestly. I'm learning to appreciate others' stories without trying to make them my own. Diego studied him for a moment. Growth often comes from our greatest failures. He placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. We should go. As they turned to leave, Lawrence called out, Zoe? She paused, looking back. Your writing, it was always exceptional. I knew that even then. That's why he stopped, unwilling to make excuses. I know, she said simply. That's the tragedy of it all. You could have nurtured what you recognized instead of trying to claim it. As they walked away, Lawrence opened the book again, tracing his fingers over her written words. Outside, spring continued its determined push through the concrete city, new growth emerging from the cracks of winter's end, just as Zoe Rivera had emerged from the cracks he tried to create in her confidence. He placed her book on the bestseller display, positioning it so her name caught the light. Then he returned to his shelving cart, handling each book with new reverence, each one a voice that deserved to be heard, including those once silenced by voices like his own.